For all of us, this year has been really different. And there's probably been quite a few things that you were hoping would happen or that you wanted to do that you haven't been able to do because of the new rules that we're living with. And even though now we're back at school or back at work, still things aren't the same. And it doesn't look like they might not be the same for quite a while. But actually, it's all right to talk about those things that we've missed, the things that are making us feel sad because we really wanted to do them or we really wanted to go to a particular place. Why don't you spend some time chatting together about some of those things that you had wanted to do this year? And then why don't you turn that into a prayer to God? Lots of the time when we speak to God, we say sorry, we say how wonderful he is, we ask him for things. But actually, we can talk to him about anything. And that includes saying to him and being honest, actually, I'm really sad about this. So have a chat. If you want to, pray about it. And then press play again. And I'm going to tell you a story which I think really helps us with this situation.
This is Jeremiah, and Jeremiah was given a special job by God, and that was the job of being a prophet. Now, what a prophet did was listen to God and then pass on God's message to God's people. And God's people are called the Israelites, and that's because they lived in Israel. And at the beginning, the Israelites listened to what Jeremiah was telling them and they followed God. But as time went on, they started to look elsewhere as well and do different things. And so they started to worship idols and do things that actually God didn't like and made God sad. And Jeremiah tried to warn them and tell them that actually God was getting angry with them. And if something bad was to happen, then God wouldn't save them. Well, the problem was the Israelites didn't listen. And they had a fight with people from Babylon. And the Israelites lost the fight. And so they were all taken to live in Babylon, where they had to work as slaves for this king, King Nebuchadnezzar. Well, obviously, they weren't happy with that situation. And Jeremiah had been left in Jerusalem. He was still living in Israel. And he was sad at what had happened, and he was still hearing God's voice and getting God's messages. And so instead of being able to tell them in person, he wrote letters to the Israelites telling them what God was saying to them. And we can read one of these letters in Jeremiah chapter 29. And in it, God says to the people, look, stop moaning. What you need to do is build houses, plant gardens, eat the fruit and veg from those gardens, get married, have children, and get your children married so that they can have even more children. And then, most importantly, live in peace. Well, the problem was the Israelites didn't like living in Babylon. They had dreams of going back to Israel. And there were some people amongst them that were saying, oh, don't worry, it's going to be all right. We'll be back in Israel really soon. And Jeremiah had to say to them, no, that's not God's plan. God's plan is for you to live in Babylon for 70 years. But don't worry, because God's plan is to make sure that you have hope. And he's going to give you success. And he will make sure that you are not suffering. But first of all, you've got to live in Babylon for 70 years. And after that time, when you start following God, God will hear your hopes and dreams and what you want, and he will take you back to Jerusalem, and you can worship your God at home.
Within that story was a verse that probably lots of adults are really familiar with. It's Jeremiah 29 verse 11. And in it, God says, don't worry, I've got a plan. And it's a plan that's going to give you hope, that's going to give you a future filled with success and no more suffering. And it is a verse that lots of adults share with one another because it's really encouraging, isn't it? Absolutely. I want to know that God's got a plan. I want to know that I've got a life filled with hope and that people aren't going to have to suffer. The problem is that actually we don't always read the bit beforehand. And the bit before says to the Israelites, actually, first of all, you're going to have to live for 70 years in Babylon. Now, they weren't really chuffed with that, were they? Because they didn't enjoy it. It wasn't home and they weren't very happy. They were having to work hard for somebody else and they didn't have the same kind of freedom that they'd had before. And that's the same for us at the moment, isn't it? We haven't got the ability to do all the things that we want to do. And we're living in a difficult situation. And it's hard because we know at the moment that that situation isn't going to end tomorrow. Now, I don't think it's going to go on for 70 years, but actually it's not going to be like tomorrow we're all better and we can do whatever we want. So actually, a bit like the Israelites, we've got to learn to live with the way we find ourselves in now, the situation we're in now. And it can be really easy when we're in those difficult times to just spend all our time moaning about it. Now, I told you it's okay to be sad, but actually if you're only ever sad, then you're not really living with the situation as it is. And so it's what's important for us is to follow the example that God was asking of the Israelites. He was saying, turn back to me. Yep, you're going to have to live in Babylon for 70 years, but hold on to the promise that I'm giving you, that there's a plan, that you've got hope, that there's going to be a future filled with success and no more suffering. And that's the same promise that God makes to us today. So in this time where things are different, where there's some things we want to do that we can't do, what God's asking us to do is to make the best of it. Actually, what are the things that we can do? What are the things that we're doing that we really enjoy that we might not have done before if we hadn't had these different rules to live by? Maybe it's actually that you don't mind spending that much time with your family. Or maybe it's that you've discovered some really nice places to go out near where you live. Well, why don't you do that? Sit together now and plan maybe an afternoon out or an hour of time together at home, whatever it is that you've really come to enjoy, that actually is about the things that you can do. And when we get sad about the things that aren't happening, let's turn them into prayers to God, but also ask God and listen and catch from him the things he wants us to do at the moment. And hold on to that promise that God is with us and we have a hope in him that things will get better. But why don't you plan now something that you might be able to do as a family? And I hope you have fun doing it, and I'll see you soon.